All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about over the last several days. Why was I so wrong about Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Of course, I had no faith in the US intelligence community given their long track record of being flat wrong, but I think fundamentally it was this. I just simply had too much respect for Vladimir Putin. I thought he was paranoid, yes, but ultimately a mostly rational and logical actor driven by historical Russian concerns in the region. Yes, I saw those 180,000 troops around Ukraine, and I thought, once again, logically, if you want to extract maximum promises from the West regarding Ukrainian membership status in NATO and a credible threat is then important. But I made the mistake that a lot of people have made throughout history. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Putin's invasion of Ukraine is anything but logical. Let me explain. Putin's core beef with the West was that we expanded NATO outward from its original boundaries at the end of the Cold War. I think that's really fair. He drew red lines then in Ukraine and in Georgia, and he said they can never get NATO membership, and has had credible military deterrent after his campaigns in Chechnya, Abkhazia, and Georgia. Now, after he ignited the immediate crisis with the troop deployments, the president of Ukraine himself said, well, maybe NATO is just a dream. And here in Washington, the whispers were loud. And you heard the private acknowledgement that, yes, Ukraine will never be a part of NATO. Putin made it clear it was a red line. If he had held off, I'm actually very certain he could have extracted a promise from Zelensky and the Ukrainian government themselves that NATO membership was off the table 100%. He could literally have gotten everything that he said he wanted. And here in the US, people like myself would have been supportive of giving him that guarantee. But then, last week, he decided instead to not just move into eastern Ukraine, Putin greenlit a full shock and awe campaign against the entire nation from east and west by land, air, and sea. And by doing that, Putin has committed one of the most colossal follies in modern memory by a Russian leader. Firstly, this invasion has fulfilled the wildest dreams of the neocons and the war hawks in D.C. U.S. views of Russia are now at 85% unfavorable, spiking to the highest level today than since the end of the Cold War. Public opinion is now on the side of the most maximal actions against Russia, short of war. He has empowered his greatest enemies in the capital. Next, Putin has awoken a sleeping giant in Europe. Donald Trump famously castigated NATO allies for not paying their fair share of 2% GDP defense spending targets. Most Western NATO countries, like France and Germany, have been sitting on their hands funding their expensive welfare states, mooching off of the U.S. nuclear umbrella for almost 30 years. And now, what has Putin done? Well, he has greenlit a massive expansion of military budgets on the European continent. Europe is 1/5 of world GDP. They may be lazy and mostly useless in many normal times. But when you see a massive invasion just a few hundred miles away, even the laziest people wake up. And that is what has happened. Germany, the country which has been the most reluctant to spend on defense, and has even relied on Russian gas despite warnings from the West not to do so, announced yesterday they will increase GDP defense spending on defense over 2% for the first time in modern history. More so, they will build new LNG terminals in Germany to reduce reliance on Russian gas and purchase it instead from people like the United States. This is a titanic shift in German national security and energy policy that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. Putin has now accelerated higher defense spending on the continent, even amongst the biggest doves in Europe, and he has pushed his largest European customer into the hands of the West. Just as reliant as Germany is on Russian gas, it is also true that the Russians are as reliant on German cash. And then finally, and the worst development for peace is this, Putin has now ensured a permanent U.S. and Western deployment to NATO. President Biden sent an additional 7,000 troops to Germany, replacing several thousand troops who were then sent to the furthest east of the NATO alliance. Furthermore, Chancellor Scholz, in his speech pledging more defense spending, also indicated Germany will be sending more troops to the eastern flank of NATO. This is all but now ensured for literally years to come. Furthermore, the U.S. and the West are providing untold billions of dollars in military aid, not only to Ukraine, but to the eastern countries around it. The current estimate in the immediate term is $10 billion just this month for the immediate crisis. That does not even mention the absolutely massive military budget, which is going to make our current one look tiny in comparison when the next appropriation cycle comes up. So let's all sum this up. Putin, in his goal to fend off NATO and Western reaction, has instead united the Western public against him. He has empowered the foes of Russia in every Western capital, from Washington to Paris to Berlin. He has spurned one of his biggest energy customers, pushed the biggest dove in Europe to spend more on defense. He has ensured now big U.S. Western military deployments right up to the edge of the Russian border, and he has strengthened the bipartisan consensus against Russia in ways he probably does not even comprehend. Add on top of that, he has now invited the most harsh and strict sanctions against Russia that we have ever seen applied in the West. He ensures financial ruin for many of his citizens, travel bans, a massive hit to the quality of life of Russians, and an economic depression, the likes of which Russia has not seen in decades, geopolitical isolation, save for a tentative ally in the Chinese. And I have not even mentioned this invasion ain't going so well so that far, given the high death toll amongst his soldiers. This is a colossal mistake. It's not logical, and I won't lie, I fear for the fate of humanity. This was the action of a person who abandoned rationality, and in his hands is one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the history of mankind. There are few off-ramps from here, given what Putin has done, and the eyeball-to-eyeball days of the Cold War are back. While there is blame in Washington, the majority of it today lies with Putin. And I hope to God we can get out of this one without total annihilation. That's the part I keep coming back to. But the more you continue to...
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.